we've been looking at Daniel's 70th week in perspective of three main events that concern Israel as the nation. So the first one we looked at is the first seal, where Antichrist makes firm a covenant with Israel 7 years. And then the second event is halfway through he breaks covenant and he turns against the Jew. And we saw about how Israel and us will go through a time of great tribulation, but then we'll be taken out. Israel will go into the wilderness 1,260 days. And also there's a third group that we haven't looked at, which is the 144,000. And I wanted to look at them next before we get to that third event of Armageddon. But there's another two people that actually come on the scene before the 144,000, which are called the two witnesses. I'm convinced that they start prophesying before this time, because they're going to go to heaven at the time of the sixth trumpet. They prophesy for 1,260 days, which pushes them before this time. Okay. So we read about them in Revelation chapter 11, verses 3 to 14. Verses 3 to 14. So let's just read it, and then we'll look at some issues concerning these two people. So it says in verse 3, "And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. They have power to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the streets of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom in Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Those from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate. And they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, 'Come up here.' And they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly." So first thing I want to look at is this idea of the woes. The woes. So you turn to chapter 8, verse 13. In chapter 8, we are in what's called the trumpet judgments. 4 of these trumpet judgments have happened by the time these verses come into play. And so it says here, "Then I looked and I heard an angel flying in mid-heaven, saying with a loud voice, 'Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound.'" So this eagle that flies in mid-heaven pronounces 3 woes and connects them to 3 trumpets, which are trumpet 5, trumpet 6, and trumpet 7. Okay. The 3 woes are linked to trumpet 5, trumpet 6, and trumpet 7. If you look at chapter 9, verse 12, "After the 5th trumpet is come with locusts that torment people who took the mark of the beast for 5 months, and they won't be able to die. The people who are tormented, they'll try and seek death, they won't be able to get it. So it's going to be a hectic judgment that's going to be put out. It says at the end of that one, in verse 12, the first woe is past, behold, 2 woes are still coming after these things. Trumpet 5, once that happens, it says, the first woe is past. Then, after the 6th trumpet, in verses 13 to verse 21 of chapter 9, then we go into chapter 10 and 11. And it's only in chapter 11, verse 15, we read about the 7th trumpet that is blown. At the end of chapter 11, verse 14, where at the end of that whole thing of the 2 witnesses, it says, after they're taken up into heaven, the 2nd woe is past, behold, the 3rd woe is coming quickly. Which means when they are resurrected and go into heaven, it happens at the time of the 6th trumpet judgment, which is an army of 200 million that come from the east, from the Euphrates, and kill 1/3 of mankind, and they're heading to the land of Israel. Now this is where it gets a bit hazy for me, because if you look at it, it says the 3rd woe is coming quickly. That word quickly there is used about 5 or 6 other times in the book of Revelation. And every other time that word quickly is used, in Greek it's the word tachus, okay? Every time that word is used quickly, it's speaking about Jesus coming. Tachus, I'm coming quickly. That means when he comes, it's going to happen very quickly. This, it says the 3rd woe, when it happens, it is coming quickly. Coming quickly. So, does Jesus come at the 7th trumpet? Now, this is where I'm not too clear, because if you read Revelation 19, when it speaks about Jesus' return, it ties it very concretely to Armageddon. When he comes out of heaven, he's coming to Armageddon. It doesn't tie it to trumpet number 7. So maybe Jesus is coming at trumpet number 7. Maybe trumpet number 7 is merely a death knell. A sign or something that's put out there that shows the Antichrist your time is up. Either way, if Jesus does come back at trumpet number 7, or even if he comes back at the time of Armageddon, then either way, trumpet number 7 is a message to Antichrist. Your time is up. And that's why Antichrist is going to gather all the peoples to come against Jesus to war for Armageddon. Because Antichrist's mindset is the same as Babylon. My kingdom is forever. What did Nebuchadnezzar say? Look how great I am. I've established, and he built a golden statue to say, this gold that represents me is forever. My kingdom is forever. The kings of the earth don't want to let go of the power. Just look at Mugabe. He must be at least 325 years old, because he just doesn't die. He's holding on for dear life to his power. Okay? That is the way Antichrist will be. So if he can get rid of Jesus, he can keep his kingdom forever. So whatever the case, these 3 woes are like, your time is up. Your time is up. So let's look at these 2 witnesses. They're the 2nd woe. They're the 2nd woe. Now you'll notice something about them. They do certain signs. So if you look at some of the signs here, if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. That, you read about that kind of thing in 2 Kings chapter 1. 2 Kings chapter 1. Ahab's son is on the throne. He wants to capture Elijah, the prophet. He sends a band of 50 soldiers with a captain to capture Elijah. And Elijah sat on a hill. And the captain calls out, "O man of God," this is what the king's saying, "come down here." And Elijah says, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down out of heaven and consume you and your 50. And fire comes out of heaven and consumes them. Then the second time, the king sends another 50 with a captain. Same thing happens again. The third time, the third 50 comes out, that captain says, please don't do anything. I've been told to come here, but I know, I know what's going to happen if I try and arrest you. And so Elijah's willing to come with him, and the third are spared. 2/3 are cut off, 1/3 is spared. Elijah. That's what happens with Elijah, fire coming from heaven. These two witnesses, when people come against them, fire comes out of them and consumes their enemies. Very much like Elijah. The second thing is, they have power to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. Elijah again, 1 Kings chapter 17. 1 Kings 17. Elijah again. Kings 17, Elijah again. Elijah stops the rain from falling for 3.5 years. Just as these guys do. 1,260 days is approximately 3.5 years. During the time of their prophesying, there's going to be no rain on this earth. It's going to be hectic. It's going to be hectic. And guess what? We're here for the first part of that. Now, when the rain didn't fall, what did Elijah do? He went to a brook, Kerith, and he drank water from this tiny brook. So tiny that no one really knows where it is. It's not any major river or anything. It's a little brook, and ravens came and fed him meat. He was looked after by God and nourished in the wilderness, very much like Israel. Okay? So even though we face that time, it may be water and meat, but God will look after. There were other prophets that were hidden by 50s in a cave by Obadiah, the servant of Ahab. He brought them bread and water. So Elijah had it better than them because at least he had meat. They had bread and water, but no matter how basic it is, God will look after his people. It can be very basic, but God will look after his people. And so these two witnesses, they hold the rain from falling on the earth during the time of their prophesying. And then, so that's 1 Kings 17, that's like Elijah. And then it says, and they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. Who does that remind you of? Moses. Okay, so we need to look at this a little bit more. But the first manner of plagues that come on the earth are in seal 4. Pestilence. Before that, Antichrist, war, and famine. Pestilence comes in with seal 4. It's very possible that's when they start prophesying. Seal number 4. Because seal number 5 is halfway through. It's the abomination of desolation of martyrs. So, and then, with these trumpet judgments, we see the waters, a third of the waters turning to blood. We see that. So, and with those bowls, we see the waters and the rivers being turned to blood as well. It's interesting. So who are these two witnesses? They're not symbolic of the church. It's the first thing we mentioned. They're not symbolic of the church. They are two individuals. How do we know this? Because if you look in verse 7 and 8, When they finish their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss, so here's where he comes out of the abyss here. That beast who comes out of the abyss, when he's raised from the dead and then he sits himself in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God, and people worship him. Here, the same beast will kill these two witnesses. Okay? He will kill them. And then it says, and their bodies, dead bodies, will lie in the street of the great city, which is mystically called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. There are two things here. The street of the great city is literal. Sodom and Egypt is symbolic. They're not, where it says where the Lord was crucified, that's not symbolic. He's using Sodom and Egypt to speak symbolically of that city. He explains what the symbol means by talking about where their Lord was crucified. That's the literal. It cannot be the church, because the church isn't all going to be in Jerusalem. Does that make sense? It's going to be two people whose dead bodies will lie on that city. It's a literal thing. And therefore, it has to be two literal people. Does that make sense? And so, who are they? Well, some people think the two people that never saw death in the Bible are Enoch and Elijah. So they think it has to be Enoch and Elijah because they never died. So they have to die in order to be raised from the dead. But it's not true. Because do believers have to die in order to get their resurrection body? No. Some of them are going to be raptured. God is able to give us a new body without us dying. So Enoch and Elijah don't need to be the two witnesses on account that they never died. They'll get a new body whether they die or not. So the death issue is not the issue. There's always been two witnesses throughout Scripture, because the Bible says, on the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact is to be confirmed. When God sent the plagues to Egypt, there were 2 witnesses. One was in a ruling position. He was the prince of Egypt, but then he became almost like the judge or the ruler of Israel, Moses. And then you've got a high priestly figure. You've got Aaron. They bring plagues on Egypt, and Aaron is the mouthpiece of Moses. And then when Israel go into the land, you have another 2 witnesses, Joshua and Caleb. And they're the only 2 witnesses out of 12 who believe that God would bring them in the land. And they're the 2 that are the prominent ones that are involved in taking over the land, bringing a death to the kingdoms of Canaan, just as here we bring a death to the kingdoms of the world, so that Jesus takes over. So you've got 2 witnesses there. You've got 2 witnesses with Elijah and Elisha. They overlap, and their ministries happen one after the other. But Elisha joins Elijah there and he's being trained, and then he takes over. So they don't happen at the same time, but they definitely, it's Elijah and Elisha, and after Elisha it's not another one. It's 2 of them. They belong to each other. And then you've got Jesus and John the Baptist. But there's 2 ultimate ones we'll look at, but 2 ultimate types that we'll look at just now, which are Zerubbabel and Joshua. They're 2 major ones, because Scripture here shows us there are 2 major types of these 2 witnesses. But they're doing the signs of Elijah and Moses. And to me, one of them is definitely Elijah. One of them is definitely Elijah. If you look at Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. Behold, I am going to send to you Elijah the prophet. So Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. I'll write that down. Malachi 4, verse 5. Behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. So at the end of their witnessing, that's a death knell to Antichrist. And that means Jesus is going to come back and he's going to restore the land. Otherwise, there'll be nothing of the land left. And that's where God says, I'll make a destruction, but not a complete one. Otherwise, if these two guys hadn't come on the scene, that's exactly what would happen. There would be no restoration. There would be complete destruction. So these two witnesses are going to be involved in the bringing of Israel back to God and to one another. Yeah. So these two witnesses are, and the reason is this. We'll look at it just now, but the reason is this. They are witnesses unto Jesus, and they picture Jesus more than the Antichrist and the false prophet in their counterfeit of Jesus. Their mirroring of Jesus is greater than the counterfeit, which will make the Jews wake up. So we'll see that just now. So, and there's another one. The two. Remember when Jesus went up the mountain, and Peter, James, and John were with him, and they saw him in his majesty, and they saw, in a sense, a prelude of the kingdom to come before it came. Jesus in his glory, his glorified state, even before he got his glorified body. And so Peter says, we were eyewitnesses of his majesty on the mountain. The two that were with him were Moses and Elijah. So they do the miracles of Moses and Elijah. It seems so clear to me that at least one of them, because of this prophecy, has to be Elijah, because he mirrors Elijah so much. Remember when Jesus came, before Jesus was a forerunner called John the Baptist. John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah. He was doing the same kind of ministry, a restoration ministry of bringing Israel back to their God. Just like these guys are doing. And Jesus says Elijah is coming. But I tell you that Elijah's already come. In other words, there's two Elijahs. There's an Elijah that time, there's going to be an Elijah in the future as well. It's pointing forward to this time. He's going to come when? Before the great and terrible day of the Lord. So when he starts witnessing, it has to be before this time. Now that's where you've got someone like Arnold Fruchtenbaum. He says, no matter how similar he is to Elijah, this can't be Elijah. That's what he says. It can't be Elijah. Why? Because for Arnold Fruchtenbaum, this whole time here is called the day of the Lord. For him, he says the whole 7 years is the day of the Lord. And Malachi says, Malachi says Elijah's coming before the great and terrible day of the Lord, which would mean Elijah has to come here. Do you understand what he's done? Because he's wrongly understood that the whole 7 years is the day of the Lord. He has to put Elijah there. But when you see that these two witnesses, and a lot of pre-trib people believe this, not just people who are not pre-trib, a lot of pre-trib people believe that Elijah is one of the two witnesses. That means the day of the Lord has to come after they start prophesying, which pushes the day of the Lord on this side. The day of the Lord doesn't begin here. It begins afterwards, at some point after that point. And we believe it begins here with the sixth seal. So that would be after they start prophesying. So Elijah's come before the great and terrible day of the Lord. That for me is a very, very strong argument that the day of the Lord does not begin here.